for dentists, dental team members, and industry professionals. We'll share stories and lessons from clinicians and industry visionaries with the goal of providing an entertaining and informative look at the industry we share. And our guest today is none other than Rohit Joshi, CEO of Brightsquid. Woo! Rohit, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks. Thanks for the time today.
Thanks for joining us. I think Rohit, you and I have been acquainted for about 4 or 5 years now, it seems. And you're multi-degreed. You have a degree in molecular biology, a degree in medical science, a surgery and orthopedics, and a law degree. So first of all, I feel very inferior. But I have to ask, what led you to dentistry and starting up the Brightsquid technology platform?
Sure. Yeah. So it's a long question. I'm glad our podcast is going to be about an hour and a half today.
That's right.
That's about what it takes me to go through my own thinking around it. But a very long story short, I had a lot of curiosity around the sciences. I did well in high school, and one thing led to another, and I quickly ended up in a master's program, which was very interesting, looking at sort of the molecular aspects of surgical options. Actually, it's pretty interesting. But then, interestingly enough, I decided that law was going to be where I made my career. So I got called to the bar and worked in law for a little while. But my particular area of interest was in intellectual property and in contract law. And one of the companies I was working with invited me to come on board, and it happened to be a small technology startup. And very soon after joining, recognized that they didn't have anywhere near a full-time job for a lawyer, but had a lot of opportunity to build a business, and found my passion and love, and sold that company and moved down to Seattle so I could be closer to Microsoft and Amazon, and did all that, and continued down really technology leadership for the last 25 years or so.
Cool. Well, and so it seems like there's a piece also of you, and a lot of our guests are this way, and we're kind of that way too, is that, entrepreneurial and just loving the day-to-day of is it the day-to-day of the unknown, or is it the misery? What is it about entrepreneurial?
I think it's the promise of the unknown.
Yeah. And so another big segment of our viewership and listenership is these dentists who are entrepreneurial. It's the ones that kind of realize that they're running a business. And so do you think all dentists are entrepreneurs, and how do you connect with them with, what you're doing now?
Yeah, great question. And so the way I ended up in dentistry was, I had this background in biology and science, and I also had this legal background, and what I really was an entrepreneur, back to your question, right? And so I wanted in my own company, I really wanted to do something that would sort of mesh challenge around the communication of medical files and some of the technology around that, medical, dental, whatever files they were. And the legal requirements were what was interesting to me as well from an academic standpoint. So that's how I ended up here. So as I got into it, I recognized that medical side of things was interesting, but that personality-wise, I really meshed a lot more with the dentists that I was meeting, because they had not only the frustrations of trying to deal with the regulations and compliance, but some of the same frustrations in operating a business. And so, but to be really candid, I think most of the entrepreneurs that I met as dentists were accidental entrepreneurs. They're individuals who had great technology or great technical skill. Many of them were artists. I would consider them more artists than they were entrepreneurs. But they find themselves, in order to express it, they had to be in a company, in their own company in many cases. I think that's changing. I think that what I'm seeing with corporate dentistry, and this won't come as a surprise to either of you guys or your audience, corporate dentistry sort of seems to be taking a little bit of that entrepreneurial spirit away from the dentist. And not negatively. I think that that's just what is happening. And so just as an observer, I'm seeing that. But I have met some key opinion leaders who are artistic, they're technically excellent, and also great entrepreneurs. They really have put it together, and those are exceptional individuals that I get a lot of energy from meeting.
So what makes a great entrepreneur? What makes someone a great entrepreneur?
Sure. I mean, I think, if I look at, the three of us, there's naivety, there's optimism. There's optimism and naivety are the two pieces. Everyone talks about risk. I think because if we knew the risks, we'd still probably do it because we're optimistic around the risks. Yeah. And so there's something about that as a character. Now, I think from an entrepreneurial standpoint, I've always looked at it in terms of thinking about, what does it take to get into? What are the skills and what are the people that I'm going to need in order to be successful, to start this endeavor? What am I going to try to accomplish while I'm doing that endeavor? And then how do I exit that endeavor? And I think, from an entrepreneurial standpoint, the characteristics of who we are is different than what I think an entrepreneur is. The best entrepreneurs that I've met have had some level of passion and unbridled spirit in the creation, the managing, and even in the exit, in the appropriate destination that they're ending up. And I think that's really interesting to me, just personally, and it's driven by a purpose, owning a business. There's something about the purpose, and one of my people that I work with in business, the way she put it to me was, if someone gave you all the money you wanted for your company and burned it to the ground, what would you feel a loss of? What is it in that you didn't accomplish? And that's an interesting way to see, what drives an entrepreneur. Because this is working 15 hours a day is something we all want to do. It's really about something else. And so that's what, I think an entrepreneur has that level of desire and that level of purpose that makes it a quest rather than a job.
Sure. So I think it's a bit of an offshoot from that. And you talked, I wrote this down, you used the term accidental entrepreneur. And I wonder if, I think in a way that applies to yourself, right? You have this academic background, and then you don't want to go into law, and all of a sudden, wait a minute. And you talked about, the quality about having this passion and having a drive. And so as you build, and you've built companies, and you're building a company now, as you build a company and you start to add team members and you bring people into the fold, how do you instill that same drive and passion, and how do you, I guess the question is your management style. You're a visionary leader as an entrepreneur. So how do you marshal your team to carry out that vision and obviously, of course, build profit for the company?
Yeah, great question, Michael. And it's something that isn't, I don't think it's easy. It's quite deliberate. Actually, as you mentioned, not the first time I've grown a company, but probably it is the first time that I've started with one guy and gone to now 30 plus. And what changes during that period is you have to be able to articulate the passion and the vision in different ways. Because when there was 5 of us, even though we weren't necessarily in the same office, we were all virtually connected through Skype and other tools. And it's easy to convey that into that passion. The challenge that I think in entrepreneurism is how do you manage to continue that passion for people who don't talk to you every day now, and people who might see you once a week at a company meeting, or once a month at a different meeting. And so I think there's a lot to do around the hiring practices about how do we hire the right people, and for that to happen, we have values. What are we standing for, and what purpose does the company exist for? What's that thing beyond, as I described it before, if we sold it and moved on, what would be undone? And so it makes it right into our hiring practices. And the people that we speak to have to understand and have to have a connection with what we're doing, or else it doesn't work. And I think, fortunately, looking at sort of patient care and the ability of a dentist to do their roles and try to make technology a facilitator and not a barrier, I think these things are very easy and understandable for people to get their head around. And for my teams, it's easy during a hiring session to talk about what their experience has been and how we think we can change that experience and better the experience.
How involved are you in the, hiring, I think, is so important.
Yeah.
It's the beginning of the relationship. It's
Sure.
probably so much needs to be put into that.
Right. Whether it's a corporate environment or a dental practice.
Or a dental practice, yeah. I mean, you could put it anywhere. And so how involved are you in that process? And how do you make sure it goes well? And are you any good at it?
For starters, I think it's from where all good things can come or all bad things start. And so I've been involved in creating sort of standard questions, and so the teams that meet with people obviously are going to take their own spin on it, but putting people in those positions that they're going to be successful, like my team who's hiring. But I've met every hire so far. And before we bring someone on board, I want to make sure that there's collegiality around that. One of those. But there has to be that sense that we're doing, we're working as a team. Things aren't going to be easy. And it really is a startup, moving from 5 to 35, you're doing things that you're not necessarily really good at for starters, but then have to specialize more and more and more. So there's a degree of flexibility that we need, particularly in our type of a growth company. But to answer your question, Matthew, I'm involved in every one. And I suspect that will change. It's changed for me in previous companies that have gotten a lot bigger. But I would hope it wouldn't change too much. I think it's the start of it all. Yeah.
Right. And, we've talked some on, a lot of our audience are dentists, and we've had dentists on as guests as well as industry people. And we talk, quite a bit sometimes about hiring and unfortunately sometimes about firing. And you said, you hire for values. And I think that speaks to, the old adage, or maybe it's a cliche that, you can teach skills, you can't teach attitude. And I think that in a startup environment, that's very important, because everyone ends up having to do things, just like you said, that you don't know how to do, or, you're not good at, or it's not your favorite thing to do. And I think that's also true for a dental practice. You can hire the most experienced front office person or assistant or hygienist, but if they don't have that collegiality, if they don't mesh with the rest of the team, and if they don't have the same values that and the same purpose that you mentioned earlier, then you've got a bad apple and eventually potentially a spoiled bunch. So yes. Have you ever had a bad apple spoil the bunch? Or
yeah, lots of times. I think in multiple environments that I've ended up, I'm often coming in and to help sort of clean up in said direction. And so it's a challenge, right? And usually where I start is, of course, understanding if they've got goals, the same values as the rest of the team. But the second part of that is really getting close to what their job is, because I strongly believe that, in kind of a strengths-based approach, what is someone naturally talented at, and how do we help them build? And in one of my, startup philosophies is you've got to know yourself so well, because you have to be comfortable with the fact that you're not good at it.
Yep.
And I'm the first one to do it. They say, you know what, you're excellent here, but this isn't a challenge, even though both are part of your job. So how are we going to help you get rid of the part that you're not good at? And unfortunately, because we're not going to hire a person right away, how do we feed that, or how do we make systems to get that better, so that we can leave you to do the things that you're really good at? And by the way, you're really good at it.
Right.
So,
and so there's something about that, yeah. And so I have. So I'm living in Seattle and different. I've gone through up and down economies. I've gone through good and bad eggs. I've gone through all of that, and I don't really see it negatively. I see it as a mismatch, and it's not usually good for the person any better it is than it is for the company. So the best thing I can do if I like the person, I believe they're honest and they're just a bad fit, is I do what I can to find other companies that they might work for. If they're not capable or not competent, that's almost a different thing. Then I can endorse them in somewhere else. But I have come across situations where we just didn't have their fit, and that's where I'll do my best to find them something else in the business, with my business connections.
I sense that in your style, your leadership style is more nurturing and sort of sharing and bringing people along. Is that true? And kind of how did you learn that? Is that something that serves you well?
Yeah, I would agree, Matthew. I think that I'm not sure my team would agree, but that's the way I view myself.
Right.
And so I'd say that depending on which stage of the startup I've been in, and so at the earliest stages, you're just kind of forming the ideas, you're forming the systems, and leadership is distributed. I have some knowledge from the industry that I've been able to gain. Other people have other knowledge, and it's a distributed leadership where I've got a role to play that I'm going to manage through the next phase. And then what I tend to try to do is give people as much direction as I can give them with respect to the tasks that have to be completed. And then try to get out of their way. I feel like my role is to set and then get away. And when working with the team, it's interesting because the discussion I've had with them is if you have questions, I need you to challenge me on what I'm telling you, because it might be perfectly clear to me. But if you're not going to be able to get to your next milestone without asking questions, then ask them. Because what might be clear for me isn't going to be clear for someone else.
So
the next phase of what I see with that, though, and the next phase after sort of giving regular direction and weekly meetings is really around the metrics management of the company. Trying to figure out how do people almost self-manage on the basis of the metrics of the company. So setting a goal, having clear metrics, and then having the team really look at those and reflect on them and manage themselves. So all I'm really doing is setting direction, but the regular management of all that is distributed back to the team.
The captain of the ship.
Captain of the ship.
The enterprise.
You brought up the captain of the ship. One of my favorite books is by a former naval captain. It's called "It's Your Ship." It's about business.
Right.
One thing we like to ask our guests are about their favorite books on business. So, Rohit, what's your favorite book on business?
This is one of those things again that I think changes over time, right?
Yep.
My favorite book right now is a book. Well, I'm looking at it right here. It's a book called Scaling Up, and it's by Vern Harnish, and it's got a bit of an ominous subtitle, which is How a Few Companies Make It and Why the Rest Don't. And so that's the stage that we're in, where the startup has been successful. We've got tens of thousands of users now, and now we're at how do we make this millions of users? Like what's our next step? And working through this book has been really instructive for me because it's almost a textbook. It's not sort of motherhood apple pie, here's what you need to do to be successful. It's like, actually fill in this form and fill in that form every week and see how you do. And here's how to reflect on that. Right. So it's more tactical, I think, from that perspective than it is sort of futuristic and purposeful like a lot of the business books that I've read in the past.
Cool. Well, I think that will wrap up. I feel like we've got more to talk about.
I think we've definitely got more to talk about, especially we didn't even touch on Brightsquid.
We didn't even talk about his favorite color.
Yeah.
I booked the whole day off for you guys.
So what we're going to do is that's going to wrap up our part one of our podcast with Rohit Joshi, and we will please join us for part two on the Dental Insiders.